But it wasn't really until the 1960s, when radiography came to be used on it, that it was realised how complicated this thing was. It undoubtedly had at least 30 gear wheels in it that exist, and when it was working, it would probably have at least 35, maybe many more if it was a more complicated version. Now, a student came to me and said he wanted a fairly practical project to look at, and I just happened to see a picture of this device in a textbook in engineering history. I said, well, look, let's see what it is. And we spent the year finding out everything that was known about this device, and in fact got far enough to write a paper at the end of it. He did very well in his degree, and I got this review paper about this strange device, you know, a calculator, mechanical calculator from 100 BC. Right, I thought, television program. So I contacted a friend of the family's who was a filmmaker, and he got very interested in this. And we started going around trying to sell the idea. But wherever we went, they said, ah, yes, but what's new? Well, no, it's...
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point. It's not new. No, but what's recently been discovered? And it then dawned that, you know, yeah, that's fair enough. What is new about the research on this? And if we're going to really understand this device, we're going to have to do our own new research. And that's exactly what happened. Over a period of 4 years, we set up together a international research program called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, which involved scientists from Greece, America, and ourselves, also epigraphers, historians of science, even mnemonists, a whole lot of disciplines. We managed to borrow a X-ray machine to do X-ray tomography. In other words, like a body scan. Weighs about 9 tons. We had to take it down to Athens on the back of on a lorry.
You had to get permission from the Greek government
for
this?
That only took 4 years.
Oh, okay.
And we'd have never done it without our Greek collaborators. So we gave it a body scan, we did some surface imaging, and remarkably, after about a year or so, we'd cracked how the thing worked. And we had a Nature paper, big Nature paper, and a conference at the same time in Athens, and it made headlines. Only media storm I've ever been involved in. My wife finds out on the story that we were in my hotel room, and she answers the phone, and she said, yes, the New York Times? No, I'm afraid he's on the other line to the Washington Post.
You know you've made it when they come calling.
But anyway, the research continued in various ways for some years after that with more sophisticated analysis of what we'd found. And it was remarkable. The most wonderful thing about this device is a calendrical device in a lot of ways. It shows where the sun is in the sky, where the moon is in the sky. It does very subtle modeling of the motion of the moon, displays cycles of the month and new moons and so on, and also when eclipses are liable to occur. So it's quite a complicated device. And as we went on and researched this more and more, what became apparent is it fits perfectly into the astronomy of its time and into the technology of its time. But until we did that work, a lot of people just thought it must be a fake, or it's just, you know...
Or built by aliens.
That's also possible, but, well, no. But that was what was good. It did fit so beautifully into the time. The only thing it wasn't very good at is predicting where the moon was in the sky. But maybe that didn't matter. It was probably maybe a display device, a teaching device, or my favorite one is that it's actually something a rich man buys to put on his mantelpiece to show their great interest in astronomy.
You mentioned teaching there, Mike. You took early retirement from Cardiff University in 2007, mainly I hear to be free from all the admin, which is totally understandable. But of course you've continued to teach yourself. You're also the current president here at the Royal Astronomical Society. You were elected in 2022. That must have been a big honour.
Indeed it was. As I say, I've been a fellow for many, many years, but never imagined I'd be running the meetings and being the president. And it's been a great privilege. I have to say it's been a lot more work than I expected, but that's probably good. And it's been a very interesting 2 years, culminating this year in the wonderful thing. The courtyard here has 5 societies around it: the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Linnaeans, the Geological Society, the Society of Antiquaries, and ourselves. And for years we've had uncertainty about the lease on this building and whether we'd be allowed to stay. This year we've managed to come to an agreement, the societies together with the government, to purchase a 999-year lease on the property. So one thing that will have come out of my presidency is not to do with me, it's all the people who've done all the hard work in the past, but it really means that this place now has a 1,000-year history in this building to go forward, doing science, communicating science, and that's a wonderful thing.
Time maybe to turn to questions from our audience here at the Royal Astronomical Society. Immediately a hand has gone up enthusiastically there.
You do a lot of spectroscopy in your astronomy. Newton did an awful lot of spectroscopy. Do you feel yourself to be channeling Newton when you're doing your scientific work?
Yeah. Interesting question. Yes, in some sense. Newton worked in so many areas. His work, as you say, on spectra. The other wonderful thing about Newton is he worked on dynamics. And a lot of astronomy boils down to orbital dynamics and Newton, and that it's beautiful analysis. So anybody doing astronomy, mechanics or whatever has that shadow at their back of what he could do. Yeah, I do feel a little bit of the shadow of him, yes.
Question from one of our younger members of the audience.
If the shipwreck that caused the Antikythera mechanism to go missing had not occurred, do you think it would have revolutionized and helped advance modern science and technology?
That's a lovely question, because it's almost inverse, because we only know about the Antikythera mechanism because it was in that shipwreck. If it hadn't been in that shipwreck, it would not have survived. We know of no other example that survives of it, because there was a huge bronze recycling industry around the classic world. Bronze was expensive, so you always recycled it. So nothing would have survived had it not been for the shipwreck. So in a way, it was good that it shipwrecked. But the question, however, does presume something else, which is, well, why did that technology get lost? Because it did get lost. And that's unclear. Whether it had to do with possibly the adoption of religious views later, around 500 AD, that somehow assumed that this was perhaps connected with astrology and was evil or something that might have suppressed it, I don't know. The technology might have gone into the Arabic world and might have survived a bit there, but we don't know, although there's still a lot of work I think could be done there. So I think it would have been interesting had that tradition been much more live by the time you got to 12, 13, 1400.
Hi Mike, I wanted to ask about what you think about the next 50 years of astronomy. We're, fingers crossed, hopefully getting data from Vera Rubin soon, from Euclid, even thinking about the integration of artificial intelligence in astronomy now. What are you most excited about for the next phase of astronomy?
Well, I think what must be surely going to be the most exciting thing is the development of the study of exoplanets and their atmospheres and whether there are signs of life.
These are planets beyond our solar system,
around other stars, which again, when I was a research student, they say, are there planets around other stars? Dunno. But we do know now. We know that almost every star has a planetary system, and that's a fantastic thing to investigate. The other thing, of course, we'd like to know about is dark matter. And in a way, there's a nice parallel, because I don't believe we have any idea, really, what dark matter is. There are good reasons for thinking it's there, but we've really no idea what it is, how it behaves, really. And there's a parallel here with my old Antikythera mechanism and the Greeks, because the Greeks were in a position then to predict planetary orbits extremely accurately, right? And we can do that too. We just assume dark matter, put the term in the equation, we can do evolution of the universe quite well. But the Greeks had no idea why they had the orbits until Newton was there and put the gravitation in. Similarly, we need something new to be able to understand this dark matter and how that affects the universe. I'm only hoping it doesn't take another millennium until that happens.
Well, that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Huge thanks to our wonderful audience here at London's Royal Astronomical Society, and of course to today's guest, Mike Edmonds. Thank you very much for sharing your life scientific.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
The Life Scientific was presented by Jim Al-Khalili and produced by Lucy Taylor.
On BBC Radio 4, being a boy now is way harder than anybody really understands, except those boys.
I'm Catherine Carr, a mother of 2 teenage boys, and in a new series I've been travelling the country to understand the hopes and fears of young men today.
If social media never existed, the world would be such a better place.
About the Boys, next Monday to Friday at 1:45 on Radio 4.
They're a boy and that's what boys are supposed to do.
Part of a series of programmes on boys and young men in Britain today, across Radio 4 and 5 Live.
Now on Radio 4, James Gallagher is joined by an expert panel to answer your questions on insomnia in Inside Health.
Hello there everyone. Can I ask you a question? Did you get a good night's sleep last night? Are you now feeling bright and rejuvenated by a deep slumber? Or did you toss and turn and lie awake in bed all night? For me, I've got a 6-month-old baby, so I think you can imagine what my sleep is like at the moment. But today we're going to be delving into insomnia in one of our special editions of Inside Health. It's one where you've sent in all of your questions. You've been getting in touch over the last few weeks. I have a trio of experts just waiting to answer them. So wakey you lot.
Hello.
Hi James. So we're going to find out when poor sleep becomes something that's damaging our health, why we get insomnia, when we should get help, whether it's actually just something we're stuck with. Let's meet our sleep crew, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves and at the same time tell me what it is you do when you can't sleep.
Hi James, I'm Faith Orchard. I'm a lecturer in psychology at the University of Sussex. When I can't sleep, it's normally because my brain is a bit wired and I'm overthinking. So I tend to pick up a book and just read until I feel ready to relax a bit more.
Hi James, my name's Dr. Ali Hare. I'm a consultant in sleep medicine in London and I'm president of the British Sleep Society. When I can't sleep, it's usually because my husband is tossing and turning and snoring in the bed. So I tend to use the sleep divorce technique and I go and sleep in the spare room.
And a final contributor?
Hi James, I'm Colin Espy. I'm the Professor of Sleep Medicine at the University of Oxford. When I don't sleep well, I tend just to get up and go back to bed again to reboot the system. And it's usually because there's something on my mind. I guess that's true for most people.
Let's hear now from some people who've been getting in touch with their experiences of insomnia.
I find that I often seem to sleep lighter, dipping in and out of sleep, with half-formed thoughts going around in my head, partly in my dreams and partly in a waking state.
The impact is absolutely massive. On days when I've had very little sleep, I drink more coffee, I eat more sugar, I'm definitely more grumpy, and if I'm at work and I'm in a meeting, I'm constantly trying to pretend that I'm not yawning.
It's the wakefulness in the early hours that's the worst. My mind races and the anxiety levels about the impact on my health skyrocket.
Colin, what is the tipping point between, oh, I've had a rough night's sleep, and it becoming something more?
If one bad night turns into several, and several weeks turns into 3 months or more, we call that insomnia.
Ali, can you answer this question that we had written in from Marion Collins? She emailed insidehealth@bbc.co.uk, and she's had difficulty with her sleep since childhood. Says 3 to 4 hours a night is a win. That sounds horrible. She describes it simply as the bane of her life and wants to know, am I unusual?
We know that insomnia symptoms are really common, so about 50% of individuals experience insomnia symptoms, but you know, such a long period of difficulty sleeping would be more unusual and would definitely merit clinical attention. As you say, it's just an awful experience not sleeping, and sleeping for such short periods for such a long time has enormous effects on our well-being, so I would definitely say to seek medical help through the GP or even your local pharmacy.
Faith, I've got one for you.
Hi, my name is Hilary from Oxfordshire. My partner has no trouble falling asleep at a reasonable time every night, but often he wakes up at 2 or 3 in the morning and is then wide awake for an hour or 2 or even 3. Is this a different kind of insomnia from when a person simply can't get off to sleep in the first place?
Insomnia presents in a few different ways, and we typically think of that idea of not being able to get to sleep in the first place, but the reality is that insomnia is about falling asleep and staying asleep. So for some people it can present as waking up in the middle of the night, struggling to get back to sleep, or waking up too early in the morning and then not getting back to sleep at all.
What's going on in the brain that causes insomnia? Like, biologically, what is it?
There's two processes that help us to fall asleep and wake up. So our sleep hormones that trigger the sleep and the pressure that we've built up throughout the day. And these two processes should work nicely together. If they're out of sync, for example, if we've had a nap in the afternoon or the evening, the processes might not be lined up and it might be harder for us to sleep. The other thing that happens for insomnia is that we might have external triggers or factors like stress.
Colin, is there an evolutionary reason that some of us are more prone to insomnia?
We still heavily depend on sleep. Evolution has not done away with sleep. In fact, we have rather a lot of sleep, and that's because we've got big brains that require a lot of assistance. But we haven't got rid of the threat response. So if something's in your mind, then your brain kind of tells you, you want to stay awake and think about something that's worrying you, because this worry could be serious, it could be threatening. But of course, we may have misjudged that, which is one reason that sort of cognitive therapy approaches are helpful.
Thanks, Colin. On to our next question.
Hi, I'm Helen from Long Ashton near Bristol. When my children were younger, I had many years of very disrupted sleep. I've got a pretty supportive husband who also did a lot, but my observation is that women still do the majority of childcare overnight. My question is, am I correct about thinking that women sleep less than men?
Ali?
Yes, women do tend to sleep less than men. Women also are more likely to have insomnia than men, so about 2 times more likely to have insomnia than men. And yes, childcare is a large part of that, as is any other caring responsibility, really.
Who else is more likely to have insomnia?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily a typical individual with insomnia, but we know that people with chronic health conditions, chronic pain, are more likely to struggle with their sleep. We know that insomnia is often comorbid, so occurs with anxiety and depression and other mental health conditions.
Colin, is there an age factor here as well?
The sleep system ages, and the body clock system ages as well. The sleep system is to do with the amount of sleep and the depth of your sleep, if you like. And the clock system is about the timing of sleep. So what happens as you get older is the sleep gets naturally a little bit more fragmented, just like my hair supply has reduced in my head as I get older. Yours seems quite intact.
It's facing its challenges.
Yes, but the clock also ages, so that, you know, a teenager tends to fall asleep late and waken late, but an older adult tends to fall asleep earlier and waken earlier in the morning. They struggle to go back to sleep.
Faith, you do a lot of work on younger people, don't you?
So teenagers are really vulnerable to poor night's sleep because our body clocks and our hormones mean we go to bed later, but we're still being dragged up for school in the morning.
Society doesn't move with you.
No, we don't adjust. So, you know, teenagers naturally end up sleep deprived during that school week, and typically they're all blamed for it. But the reality is that it's out of their control.
And Colin, is there a genetic component to all of this? Does insomnia run in families?
To some degree. I think vulnerability to stress, vulnerability to arousal or hyperarousal can have a trait characteristic, and you see that in families. There's some evidence that our chronotype, the morning person being the lark and the evening person being the owl, that those kinds of things can run in families. But insomnia is much more multifactorial. Unfortunately, we'd love it to have a very simple explanation here.
Ali, can you take us to this next question, because we've got so many people getting in touch about this one particular topic.
Hi, my name's Anita from Leeds. I've noticed significant differences in my sleep since I hit menopause 7 years ago. I am quite well informed about sleep and good sleep hygiene, so I'm fairly certain my sleep issues are menopause. Is there any decent research into why hormonal changes cause sleep changes?
So how is the menopause affecting sleep, Ali?
Yeah, so it's a really difficult time, I think, for women in many ways, but certainly can affect sleep, both how long you're able to sleep for, how much you're awake in the night, how fragmented your sleep is. Part of that's related to things like hot flashes, which can really disrupt sleep. Partly, as the caller says, is due to hormonal changes, but also partly due to mood changes, either related to the menopause, but also due to, you know, the ways in which our lives can become more stressful around menopause. We often are sort of sandwiched between young children and parents and lots of caring responsibilities.
Lots of women will go on to hormone replacement therapy. Does HRT do the job in terms of insomnia?
HRT can be helpful, particularly if hot flashes are part of the problem and part of the sleep disruption. But generally we would treat insomnia in the menopause in the same way that we would treat insomnia in other populations, and that should be with cognitive behavioural therapy, as Colin touched on earlier.
And here's another question we've got quite a few listeners getting in touch about.
Hello, I'm David from Reading, and I'm struggling to get back to sleep. I'm 65 years old, in good health, and have an active lifestyle. I have no trouble getting off to sleep, But being of a certain age, I often wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning, needing to go to the toilet. But upon returning to bed, I feel well awake, and it often takes me 1 or even 2 hours to get back to sleep. Do you have any advice for how to get back to sleep?
Colin.
Towards the morning, our sleep drive is reducing. Plus, we perhaps begin to overthink it, think I can't get back to sleep. And that becomes one of the enemies of sleep, because no one, in my experience, can get to sleep. You can only ever fall asleep. And when you try to get to sleep, you remain awake. And I suspect that's part of the difficulty here.
Any advice for David?
We might be familiar with the common problem that people get when they panic. It's called hyperventilation. You think you can't breathe. With hyperventilation, trying to breathe is something that disrupts your breathing, and trying to sleep is something that disrupts your sleeping. So the best solution, believe it or not, James, is actually to decide to stay awake and resist sleep and allow it to come naturally.
It's like there's a paradox exploding in my brain right now.
There is a paradox, and it's an important part of how we address many human conditions which involve overthinking.
I think we're going to come to more of that later in the programme. But Faith, for now, can you tackle this question that came in from Chris Smith? Because he wants to know how drinking alcohol might affect sleep. He says alcohol seems to send you to sleep, but it doesn't feel like quality sleep. Why not?
Alcohol can change the way that our sleep is set up, stages, the amount of time we spend in different stages of sleep, and it disrupts that, and we can feel then that non-restorative experience. But alcohol can also affect lots of other parts as well. So, for example, needing to go to the toilet. Also, it relaxes the muscles, it can make us snore, and it can affect the hormones, which again are all part of that crucial process of getting to sleep and staying asleep.
Well, in a couple of weeks on Inside Health, we're actually going to do some alcohol-based experiments, not about sleep, but about the whole effects it has on the body. So if you have any burning questions you want us to ask, then insidehealth@bbc.co.uk is the place to send them all to, and we'll have a look and see if we can answer some of them for you. But just a reminder, we're doing an Inside Health special on insomnia. We're answering all of your questions at the moment with Dr. Ali Hare, the president of the British Sleep Society, Dr. Faith Orchard, a psychology lecturer at Sussex University, and Colin Espy, who's a professor of sleep medicine at Oxford University. I know it's the age-old question, but do we have a settled opinion on how much sleep we need? Faith?
There are massive individual differences, and most people tend to know what they need to feel okay. So 7 hours isn't enough for me. I feel really rubbish if I have 7 hours. I probably need about 8 to be comfortable.
I finished the bedtime routine yesterday, got tired and went, I'm just going to bed early. I was asleep before 9 p.m. last night.
Yeah, I think that's a normal outcome for parents of young children.
So Ali, what are the health consequences if you don't get enough sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we know there are health consequences. I think for your listeners experiencing insomnia, I try not to spend too much time focusing on that, but certainly insufficient sleep over a longer period has impacts on our physical health and our mental health.
Colin?
Insomnia is really a 24-hour disorder, because the thing that drives people for health is not the bad night's sleep. It's the fact that they can't function well enough the next day.
Faith, we all know how we feel after just 1 or 2 nights of bad sleep. How does that stack up over time if you never get those quality nights?
We all experience that after just a couple of nights' sleep. You can feel jet lagged, you're completely kind of out of it, you can't really think. And then, unsurprising, that you then start seeing this consequence of co-occurring mental health problems. So anxiety, depression can become a real then knock-on challenge, and then you're battling 2 complicated problems.
Colin, while we're thinking about some of the health consequences of sleep, we did have a question in from Marion, who's curious about whether a lack of sleep increases the risk of dementia.
There's a growing literature about the relationship between sleep and waste clearance, neurotoxic waste clearance in the brain. It's a little bit of a step then to say that it's a causal factor, but sleep forms an important janitorial function, if you think of it like that. So it's a very, very important research topic, James.
Thank you. And one of the phrases I've been really struck by so far, it's really changed how I think about sleep already. It's just that you can't get to sleep, you fall asleep. It's not something that you kind of actively do. It's such a great way of thinking about it. But I think we talked a lot about the problem. I think we should talk about what we can do about it. And this has been front and centre of most of the comments we've had in.
When I've looked this up on the internet, it always talks about getting to sleep and how you should have a cool, dark room, no tech, peaceful before bed, don't eat too late, don't drink alcohol, etc., etc. Which all of these I do,
I've read seemingly endless books and articles and watched TV programmes on how to get a good night's sleep, but they all seem to reiterate the same basic principles.
I've tried all the obvious things like blocking out light, using herbal remedies, breathing techniques, meditation, acupuncture, relaxing music, and I'm so tired, literally, of reading and hearing how important it is to get a good night's sleep.
There's a lot to unpack there, and I think we're going to do it gradually over a while, but just the thing I want to know first, Ali, when you're having a rough patch of sleep, when does it become the point that you need to go, I need help? When should you go see somebody? Who do you even see?
The diagnosis of insomnia formally requires you to struggle with your sleep on more than 3 nights per week for more than 3 months with daytime impacts. My view is, if it's impacting on you, your performance, your relationships, that's important enough for you to seek help. So definitely, if you're experiencing problems in the ways in which your callers are describing, please see your GP. Local pharmacists increasingly are trained in how to address and support people with sleep problems as well, so that's another way of accessing help. And then, of course, in terms of what's available and that's good quality, there are digital resources designed to help with sleep that have now been approved by NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence.
Okay, Faith, I've got a question for you.
Hi, I'm Claire and I live in Glasgow and I'm 49. I'm a very light sleeper and basically wake up from a feather dropping. Do you know if there's anything I can do to try and change from a light sleeper to a deep sleeper, as it's quite annoying?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds incredibly frustrating, but there are simple things that we can do that can help just train ourselves into good routines. And the brain is very clever at learning association. So, we often talk about having good consistency, so going to bed at good consistent times, waking up at the same times, and our brain knowing where we sleep and that's the place it happens. So, trying to avoid napping on the sofa, trying to avoid working in bed. I think, home working has really shifted where people sit and do their work, and our brain's really good at...
guilty right now.
yeah, it's really common, and also fine if you sleep well, but, we're obviously talking about people who are struggling.
Colin, I've got a question for you, and I think it is right up your street.
Hi, my name is Kate Thompson. I live in Letchworth Garden City, and I've had problems with sleeping or not sleeping all my adult life, and nothing really works. I think the problem is that my brain is still active and I can't shut it up. Would CBT be worth exploring? Thank you.
Cognitive behavioural therapy. Colin.
When I listen to your callers, I hear the desperation in their voices. It's not that some of the things they've tried would not be effective. It's the fact that they're trying to become good sleepers. And good sleepers are not good at sleeping. Good sleepers are accidental sleepers. They have no idea how they do it. And the cognitive behavioural toolkit is really designed to take away control, not to give you control, so that the reason you fall asleep is because you're sleepy. There's no barrier to sleep continuing.
Here's another question.
Hello, this is Jacqueline from Saddleworth. The menopause knocked out my sleep button. When I go to bed, I'm relaxed, calm, I don't use my phone or any other digital medium, and I don't eat before going to bed. I lie there loving the comfort and warmth of my bed, but nothing happens. My body just doesn't go to sleep. I have always shied away from any kind of sleep-inducing medication, but what else can I do?
Ali, do we reach the point where we have to turn to drugs?
The best evidence treatment for insomnia is cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia. And that works in 70 to 80% of individuals, and 50% of those people see a complete remission of their insomnia. So there are certainly medications out there, but really, what I think your listeners should seek is cognitive behavioural therapy.
Colin?
People tend to think of, well, drugs is a kind of biological treatment. I've got a real problem. It's not just in my head. So therefore, surely a drug's going to help. And surely a CBT approach, a psychological treatment, is kind of some kind of psychobabble. But actually, if we just take one example of a technique within CBT, within the behavioural bit, called sleep restriction therapy. And when people aren't sleeping well on broken nights, we encourage people to go to bed for much shorter periods of time, until their sleep binds together again. To stay up a bit later, to get up a bit earlier, and then what people begin to say is, I can't stay awake till then, I can't get up at that time every morning, I have to set an alarm now. And what's happening, just like your grandma's jumper that she knitted you, and you wore from Christmas for a couple of years and it got all out of shape, What it's really done is taken the material, the wool, ripped it out, and knitted it back in together more tightly. So then it will stretch. So you need to be stuck with a shorter sleep period. But it does take a bit of time to apply this technique, but it's very, very effective.
And is that more effective than any medication?
All the international guidelines, including UK guidelines, all state unequivocally that CBT is a treatment of first choice and that drugs shouldn't be provided until people have had a trial of CBT to see if it can help them.
Faith, do you want to come in?
The problem is lots of what's out there isn't the evidence-based CBT for insomnia that we would want people to be seeking, and the damaging effect can be that people think, I tried that and it didn't work.
Well, Faith, hold that thought in your head, because here's a question for someone who has been going looking for alternatives.
Hello there, I'm Jane from Somerset, and I wanted to know more about magnesium and sleep. For several months I was consistently waking up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning until I started taking magnesium at bedtime. I found it's made a real difference to my sleep. I'd like to know, is there any scientific evidence of magnesium being an effective sleep aid?
Just to be clear, Jane was not the only person writing in about magnesium. There's definitely a lot of discussion about it. Faith?
Yeah, so I mean, there's not much research on this, and what exists is relatively small-scale studies. The findings are what we call small effects, so we don't see big change on sleep. So we would say that the evidence is pretty inconclusive at the moment.
Ali, where do we stand on something like melatonin? Because, like, if you were in a different country to the UK, you could just walk into the pharmacy and buy a gigantic bottle of it.
I think that this sort of relates partly to the question about magnesium, and the impact that had for your caller is that sleep's quite suggestible. So, yeah, there's a very powerful placebo effect with many of these supplements and medications. So that's one thing to sort of bear in mind. Melatonin is licensed for the treatment of insomnia in individuals over 55 who've had CBTIs, and we come back to this, and it probably sounds like the three of us are sort of harping on about CBT, but the reason we harp on about it is because that's where the evidence lies, and really that should always be the first line approach for treating all of these callers who've eloquently described how awful it is to live with difficult sleep.
Ali, we had a few questions that came in from people who worked anti-social hours. So this one from Lorna in Ewan was about both working night shifts and just wanted to know, what's the healthiest way to manage sleep?
Trying to optimise core sleep. So, for example, when you're not working a night shift and you're able to sleep at your normal time, trying to optimise that. And then judicious use of naps. That's one of the few times where we do usually recommend napping.
Question on a similar theme with a different reason for disrupted sleep.
Hello, my name's Rosie, I'm from Bristol. I understand the enormous benefits of a good night's sleep, but with 2 toddlers, my sleep is often very disrupted, and I usually feel absolutely exhausted. How can I get the most out of a disrupted night's sleep?
Rosie, I'm totally with you on that one. Faith, what do you do?
Yeah, exactly. It's really tricky. I have a 1-year-old. I empathise massively with this situation. I think one of the real challenges parents of young children have is that you also need time for yourself. So, you know, it's all well and good saying, well, I'm going to go to bed at 8 p.m. and I'll get enough sleep. Great, but then when's your own time? It relates to the shift work conversation as well. It's about, sometimes it's catching up. Sometimes you have to nap to make sure you've got enough sleep to look after yourself and your child. I think it is a little bit different for each person.
One thing I keep having to remind myself at the moment with my 6-month-old is that eventually this passes.
Yeah, this too shall pass.
And then we've actually got what I think is quite an interesting question, because of so many people now having devices, tablets, phones in their bedroom at night.
Hello, my name is Natasha, and I'm curious whether there's any evidence that blue light blocking glasses help promote more restful sleep.
So Faith, as I understand it, the big idea on blue light is kind of like that's the light you get in the middle of the day and like put on a pair of glasses that obviously have to pay for. They'll filter that blue light out and help you sleep. What does the science say?
What we're gradually learning is that mostly the problem seems to come from the activity that we are doing rather than the light that comes out of the device. So if we're on our phone but we're doing an activity that's quite calming and relaxing, that's going to have much less of an impact on us falling asleep than if we're doing something on the device that's very stimulating.
Let's get another question.
Hello, this is Anne from London. I have no difficulty in getting to sleep. My problem is staying asleep past 4 a.m. except in a sort of dozing in and out fashion until 6 when I give up. I wouldn't mind if I weren't so tired as a result. There's lots of advice on getting to sleep, but not so much on how to stay asleep. Any ideas?
Ali, so what do you do?
if you're awake and it doesn't feel like you're about to get back to sleep, get up, do something else for half an hour or so before returning to the bed.
How do you know in those moments that you definitely are waking up? Because sometimes I have that kind of like, I'm awake, I feel like I've been awake for hours and yet I know that I've been in and out of sleep.
I sort of sometimes liken this to when you're snacking all the way through the day and then someone prepares a lovely evening meal for you and you're not hungry enough to eat it. And I usually say to patients when I'm describing this strategy, if you're awake and you know it, then get out
That's
of the
the
bed.
point.
Yeah.
Colin?
An interesting piece of science that may be good to hear for your listeners is that this idea of being awake or asleep is probably not the whole story. That you can actually be awake and asleep at the same time. In other words...
That was the sound of my brain just spooling out of my head then. Go on.
This is because you're conscious of your mental processes during sleep. Just a little bit like when you're dreaming. You're aware of conscious processes, but you use that to confirm, I must have been asleep because I was dreaming. But you've got mental content. I think it's helpful for people to understand that although we may not have all the answers yet to insomnia, we are trying to figure out some of these curious phenomena, like this dissociation between sleep and wakefulness.
The more we talk, the more I feel like everybody's instinctive response to how to get a better night's sleep is the opposite of what we need to be doing.
You blush more when you try to not blush, you stutter more when you try not to stutter, you drive the ball off the course when you try to drive it down the middle, and when you try to get to sleep, you stay awake. So this tells us something really, really important, that the mental processes get in the way, and that we need to follow the right kind of behavioural patterns to allow the habit to form and to take hold without our sustained attention to it. And that's how you become, if you like, a good sleeper.
I think we're running out of time now, sadly. I feel like we could have done like 2 or 3 of these programs and kept on talking about sleep, which is why you have careers entirely based on sleep. But I suppose one of the things that I just have nagging at the back of my head while we've been making this is insomnia something you can actually really do something